This is the Portfolio Rubric Guidance for Standard 2, RL, KID 3. Describe how characters in a story respond to major events and challenges in a narrative text. Be sure this is a narrative text. Ideally, you'll use the narrative text that the students are familiar with, that you have been reading to the class and working with the class through your curriculum. When assessing this standard, the teacher may need to start below grade level. At levels 0 through 2, the teacher is assessing the student's ability to answer questions about the narrative text without prompting and support. The student will complete a graphic organizer or a writing piece to help them as they answer these questions. After reading the familiar text, the teacher needs to ask the student to describe the characters in the text. The teacher also asks the students to describe the setting or the settings if there's more than one. Then finally, the teacher needs to ask the student to describe what happens in the text. These are the major events. Major events should be in the correct sequence. What happens first, next, last. Students can use graphic organizers to provide these key details. Remember, describing is using adjectives. Students will describe the characters, describe the setting, describe those major events. On their graphic organizers, they can use drawings and written details. Next, this teacher will assess the student's ability to master the second grade standard. Here, the student is also including how the characters feel or how they are responding to at least one major event or the major challenge. At this level, the student does not need a graphic organizer. The student will complete this using a written piece. Once the students can describe characters, describe the setting, describe the major events in the correct order, and include how the characters feel or how the characters responded to at least one major event or challenge, then the teacher can move into assessing the aligned third grade standard. Here, in addition to describing characters, setting, and major events, and including how the character felt or responded to at least one major event, the student is also going to explain how the character's actions contributed to the major events in the text. This will be in addition to what you assess at level 5. In the suggested task, we have some questions you could ask. Just remember, in order to be aligned to the standard, you must set the students up with questions to get them to describe the characters, to describe settings, to describe major events in the right sequence, to ask questions about how the character feels or how the character responded to one of those major events. And if they're ready for 6 and 7, questions that ask them to explain how the character's actions contributed to those major events. Some sample questions for asking could be the question stem, can you describe the characters in the text? Can you describe the setting? Can you describe the major events? What happens next? Remember, the suggested task are sample questions. You do not have to ask these exact questions, but you must ask questions in order to get the students to get their thinking on paper. This is a writing assessment. At the beginning levels, for 0 through 2, students can use their graphic organizers. So teachers, you can submit the graphic organizer where the student has described those characters, settings, and major events. Or if the students didn't need a graphic organizer, you can submit the writing piece where they included their writings to describe and their drawings. It is not mandatory that students draw. If the student is able to describe characters and setting and the major events, then you move on to the levels 3 through 5, where you also, students are including how the character felt. You will be sure for this standard to include all the parts. So their description of character, setting, and major events. And then if they are ready for level 3 through 5, they are including adding on to those descriptions how the character felt or responded. If they are moving on to 6 and 7, they are also, in addition to 0 through 5 expectations, they are including an explanation of how the character's actions contributed to the major events. So for this standard, all of the writing pieces are needed to be included for your required evidence. This is a written assessment. Videos are not accepted for this standard. Once you have your student's writing piece, it is time to move into scoring the student work. When looking at the student work, if the student is not using descriptive words, if they don't have adjectives to describe characters, setting, and major events, and those major events are in the correct sequence, beginning, middle, and end of the story, that is a level 0. If the student is able to identify the character's setting and major events, and they are recalling those major events in the correct order, and they use a graphic organizer, or maybe they just needed a writing piece, and they are using adjectives to describe at least 2 of the following. So they maybe describe the characters and the setting, or they described a character and a major event. If 2 of those pieces, characters, setting, or a major event, has been described, that is a level 1. If all 3 pieces, character, setting, and the major details, have descriptive words where the student has used adjectives to describe these activities, that is the score of a level 2. Once the student has mastered describing characters, setting, and major events in the correct sequence, you can move into looking to see if the student has also described how the character felt or responded to at least one major event. If they have responded to at least one major event, that is the score of a level 3. If the student has also included a response to how the character felt for 2 major events, and they begin to describe what is the major challenge of this text, that is the score of a level 4. At level 5, the student is also including a description of how this character felt or responded to 3 major events, and they are describing what is the major challenge from the story. In addition to level 5, once the student has done all of the pieces at level 5, then you can move into assessing the student explaining how the character or the character's actions contributed to those major events. If the student can do this in addition to all of the pieces at level 5, that is a level 6. And at level 7, they are able to do all of the pieces described at 0 through 5, but they are also able to explain how the character's actions contribute to more than one of the major events in the story.